The night started out ordinary, even cheerful, which makes what happened next almost impossible to believe. It was Mason's 10th birthday, and we'd planned a small gathering. Just close family and a few of his friends. Jessica went all out, as she always did for the kids. Streamers, balloons, a custom cake shaped like a dinosaur. She was in her element, laughing with the kids, her smile so genuine it almost made me forget the cracks that had started to show between us. But then, something shifted. I noticed it while she was cutting the cake. She was holding her phone in one hand, a knife in the other, glancing down at the screen with a grin that didn't belong in this room. It wasn't the kind of smile you give your kid on his birthday. It was softer, secretive. I didn't say anything then, but my stomach tightened. It was the kind of instinct you can't ignore, even when you desperately want to. After the party, when the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, Jessica told me she had to run out for a bit. Run out? It's almost 10 p.m., I said, setting down the plate I was drying. Where are you going? She barely looked at me as she grabbed her purse. Becca's dealing with some drama. You know how she is. Becca was her best friend, a walking soap opera who always seemed to need saving. Except I talked to Becca earlier that day. She was in bed with the flu. Really? Becca? Didn't she say she was sick? I asked, trying to sound casual. Jessica froze for half a second, her hand tightening on the strap of her purse. Then she spun around with a laugh that felt too forced. Oh, right. Not Becca. I meant Susan. Work Susan. Her boyfriend dumped her. I don't know what made me stop pushing, but I let it go. Maybe it was because the lie came so smoothly, or maybe I just didn't want to start something when I didn't have proof. Either way, I stood there like an idiot as she kissed me on the cheek and walked out the door. But this time, I didn't just let it slide. I waited for 5 minutes, then grabbed my keys and followed her. The first surprise? She didn't head toward any of her friends' houses. Instead, she drove to a bar downtown, the kind of dimly lit dive we hadn't set foot in since college. I parked a few spots down and watched as she walked inside. She wasn't dressed for a casual drink with a heartbroken friend. She was in heels, a black dress, and that perfume she only wore when we went somewhere fancy. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe Susan was here and I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just tired and reading too much into things. But then I saw him. He was tall, with dark hair and a cocky swagger that set my teeth on edge. He greeted Jessica with a kiss on the cheek that lingered too long, his hand resting on her lower back like he owned her. She didn't push him away. She smiled. The same secretive smile she'd had on earlier. I don't know how long I sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to storm in and drag her out by the arm. Another part of me wanted to drive away, go home, and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But then I thought about Mason, Lily, the life we'd built together. And just like that, the anger won. I got out of the car and walked into the bar. The air inside the bar was thick with the stench of cheap beer and bad decisions. It was loud, chaotic. Nothing like the quiet I'd left behind at home. But I wasn't thinking about any of that. My eyes locked on Jessica, who was leaning into the man like he'd just told her the funniest joke she'd ever heard. I moved through the crowd, the noise fading to a dull hum. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat fueling the fire in my chest. I didn't have a plan, just raw, unfiltered rage. As I got closer, Jessica's laugh cut through the noise. She was practically glowing, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I'd seen that look before. It was the same one she used to give me when we first started dating. The same look that made me believe I was the center of her world. Now it was aimed at him. Jessica, I said, my voice low but firm. Her head whipped around, and for a second, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. The man, let's call him Mr. Wannabe Casanova, gave me a quick once-over before smirking like he had the upper hand. Oh, hey, Mark, Jessica said, recovering quickly. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. What are you doing here? I ignored her and turned to the guy. And you are. He leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed. Jason, a friend of Jessica's. And you must be her husband. He extended a hand, but I didn't take it. A friend, huh? I shot back, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Funny, I don't remember her mentioning you. Jessica jumped in, her voice sharper now. Mark, you're being ridiculous. Jason is just a colleague. We're here talking about work stuff. You know, the job that pays for those dinosaur cakes you love so much. The audacity. Oh, really? Work stuff? Is that what they're calling it these days? I said, crossing my arms. Jason, still smirking, decided to chime in. Look, man, if there's an issue, maybe you two should talk about it at home. No need to make a scene. That's when I snapped. A scene? Oh, you want a scene? I stepped closer to him, my voice rising. Let me make this perfectly clear, Jason. That's my wife you're cozying up to. And those are my kids she's lying to every time she sneaks out to see you. Jessica grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Mark, stop. You're embarrassing yourself. I'm embarrassing myself? I turned to her, my voice shaking. You're the one sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, and dragging this clown into our lives. By now, the people around us were starting to notice. A few heads turned, whispers spreading like wildfire. But I didn't care. Mark, let's go outside, Jessica hissed, her eyes darting around the room. You're making a scene for no reason. No reason. I laughed bitterly. Jessica, you're out here playing house with this guy while our kids are at home thinking you're some kind of saint. You think that's no reason? Jason stood up then, trying to insert himself between us. Look, dude, calm down. This doesn't have to get ugly. I glared at him, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. You stay out of this. This is between me and my wife. Jessica finally snapped. Fine. You want to do this here? Let's do it. Yes, I came here to see Jason. Yes, we're more than friends. But maybe if you paid half as much attention to me as you do to work or the kids, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere. The words hit me like a slap to the face. My fists clenched at my sides, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. Wow, I finally said, my voice hollow. So this is my fault now? You're the victim in all of this. She didn't answer, just crossed her arms and looked away, as if that was the end of the discussion. But it wasn't, not even close. The bar had gone deathly silent. All eyes were on us now, and Jessica looked ready to bolt. But I wasn't about to let her walk away from this without answers. You don't get to just throw that at me and shut down, I said, my voice shaking but steady enough to carry through the room. You think ignoring me will make this go away? You just admitted you're cheating, Jessica. With this guy. I pointed at Jason, who had taken a cautious step back, his cocky smirk replaced by something closer to unease. Jessica's jaw tightened, her face flush with anger, or maybe embarrassment. Fine, she spat. Yes, I've been seeing Jason. Are you happy now? Is that what you wanted to hear? The audacity of her tone was like gasoline on a fire. I could feel the heat rising, my patience unraveling by the second. Happy, I said, laughing bitterly. No, Jessica, I'm not happy. I'm disgusted. Do you have any idea what you've done? To me? To our family? Oh, don't you dare. She shot back, her voice sharp as broken glass. You think you're some perfect husband? You barely even look at me anymore, Mark. All you care about is your precious little routine work, bills, playing world's best dad. What about me? When's the last time you made me feel like I mattered? The words stung, but they weren't going to save her. So that's your excuse? Because I'm busy keeping our lives afloat, you get to sneak off with some random guy. I gestured toward Jason, who was now inching toward the exit like he wanted no part of this anymore. Don't talk about him like that, Jessica snapped, stepping in front of him. Jason treats me like a person. He listens to me. He sees me. That did it. My hands were trembling, my mind racing through every moment we'd shared, every promise we'd made. Sees you? I said, my voice dropping dangerously low. Do you think he sees the mother of 2 kids who's been lying to their faces for months? Do you think he sees the woman who's tearing her family apart for some cheap fling? Jason raised his hands in mock surrender, finally speaking up. All right, man, that's enough. You've made your point. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. No, Jason, I don't think I have made my point, I said, stepping closer. Do you even know what you've walked into? Do you know how many lives you're wrecking because you couldn't keep it in your pants? Mark, stop it. Jessica's voice was panicked now. This isn't all on him. I made my choices. Yeah, you made your choices. I cut her off, glaring at her. And now you're going to live with the consequences. Her face paled, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She wasn't in control anymore. Not of the situation, not of me, and certainly not of the narrative she'd built around her double life. I turned back to Jason. You should leave. Now. He hesitated, looking to Jessica as if she could save him. But when she didn't say a word, he grabbed his jacket and disappeared into the crowd, leaving her standing there, exposed. Coward, I muttered under my breath, watching him go. Jessica rounded on me the moment he was out of sight. What the hell is wrong with you, Mark? You can't just… What's wrong with me? I interrupted, my voice cold and steady now. What's wrong with you, Jessica? You've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, throwing away everything we've built. For what? For him. Tears welled in her eyes, but I wasn't about to let them sway me. I wasn't the one who needed to feel sorry right now. I'm done, I said, the finality of the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. You've made your choices, Jessica. Now I'm making mine. Her tears spilled over, and for a moment, she looked like she might collapse. But I didn't stay to find out. I turned on my heel and walked out of the bar, my mind already spinning with the next steps. I had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, and my mind raced with questions that had no answers. The world outside the car felt distant, like I was moving through a haze. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the rage had subsided, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching sadness. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the house where my kids were fast asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their walls. I thought about Mason's laugh that afternoon, Lily's excited chatter about her school project. They didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve this. When I finally stepped inside, the house was eerily quiet. I checked on the kids, kissed their foreheads, and went to our bedroom. The sight of Jessica's things, her shoes by the door, her scarf draped over the chair, was almost too much to bear. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the dark, replaying every moment from the past few months. Every late night, every excuse, every time she brushed me off with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The signs were all there, but I'd ignored them. But now the blinders were off. By morning, Jessica still wasn't home. That wasn't surprising, but it didn't make it any easier. I called my boss to take the day off, telling him I had a family emergency. It wasn't a lie, not really. An hour later, Jessica finally walked in. She looked disheveled, her makeup smudged, and her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. You didn't come home, I said, my voice cold. She shrugged, avoiding my eyes. I needed time to think. Think about what? I asked, standing up. How to explain this to the kids, or how to spin it so you come out looking like the victim. She flinched at that, but the defiance returned quickly. Mark, I'm not doing this with you right now. I'm tired, and No, I interrupted, stepping closer. You don't get to walk away from this, Jessica. Not anymore. You've been lying to me, to our kids, to everyone. And for what? A fling with some loser you met at work. Her face twisted in anger. Jason isn't a loser. He's… Her voice faltered, and she sighed, dropping her bag on the floor. Look, I didn't plan for this to happen, okay? It just did. It just did, I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Great explanation, Jess. I'm sure Mason and Lily will understand when we tell them their mom destroyed our family because it just happened. She groaned, running a hand through her hair. Don't bring the kids into this, Mark. This is between us. No, I said firmly. It's not just between us. Everything you do affects them, Jessica. Everything. And you know what the saddest part is? They adore you. They think you're perfect. Her face crumpled at that, but I didn't stop. Do you have any idea what it's going to do to them when they find out the truth? Or were you planning to keep that little detail to yourself? Her silence was answer enough. And then, something clicked in my brain. A memory. A conversation we'd had years ago before Mason was born. We'd been talking about trust, about how honesty was the foundation of everything. She'd promised me then, sworn, that if she ever made a mistake, she'd tell me, no matter how hard it was. But that promise had been a lie just like everything else. You know, I said, my voice quieter now, I could forgive a lot of things, but the lies, the deceit, that's what kills me, Jessica. That's what I'll never be able to look past. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not this time. I need the truth, I said, stepping closer. All of it. No more lies, no more excuses. Tell me everything. Her hands trembled as she wiped at her eyes. Fine, she whispered. You want the truth? Here it is. What she said next shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Jessica's tears fell freely now, her defiance crumbling as she sank into the nearest chair. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. She looked like she was fighting a battle within herself, weighing how much she could admit without destroying what little was left of her facade. Mark, she began, her voice barely a whisper. There's something you need to know. I folded my arms, my jaw tight. I'm listening. She took a deep breath, staring down at her hands. Jason wasn't the first. The room tilted. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. What? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Her eyes darted to mine, then away again. There were others. Before him. Not many, but... I slammed my fist on the table, the sound echoing through the room. How long, Jessica? How long have you been lying to me? She flinched but didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. A few years. It wasn't serious, just distractions. They didn't mean anything. Distractions. She said it like she was justifying picking up a hobby, not betraying her husband and her family. Didn't mean anything? I repeated, my voice trembling with rage. You threw away our trust, our marriage, for nothing? I wasn't happy, she snapped, standing abruptly. Her voice cracked, and tears streaked down her face. I felt invisible, Mark, like I was just part of the furniture. You stopped caring about me, and No. I cut her off, stepping closer. Don't put this on me. I've worked my ass off for this family. For you. If something was wrong, you could have talked to me. But instead, you went behind my back over and over again. She crumbled back into the chair, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she choked out. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know how to stop. The weight of her words was suffocating. But I wasn't done. There was more to this, I could feel it. Is Jason the father of Mason or Lily? I asked bluntly. The question felt like acid in my throat, but I had to know. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? No, of course not. Then prove it, I said. We're getting a paternity test. For both of them. Her mouth opened, then closed. For a split second, I saw something flicker in her expression. Something she couldn't hide. My stomach dropped. You're hesitating, I said, my voice icy. Why are you hesitating, Jessica? She shook her head frantically. I'm not. It's not like that, I swear. Mason and Lily are yours, Mark. I'm sure of it. You're sure of it? I asked, my voice rising. That's not good enough, Jessica. I want proof. Because right now, I don't trust a damn thing that comes out of your mouth. She sobbed harder, her words barely coherent. I swear to you, Mark, they're yours. Please don't do this. But I'd already made up my mind. I wasn't going to live in doubt. Not after everything she'd admitted. I turned and grabbed my phone, searching for a nearby clinic that could do the tests. Where are you going? She cried, panic creeping into her voice. To fix the mess you made, I said coldly. And don't even think about stopping me. Her sobs followed me as I walked out the door. I drove straight to the clinic, every mile filled with a nauseating mix of fury and dread. By the time I arrived, I was shaking, but I kept my voice steady as I explained the situation. The receptionist nodded sympathetically and handed me the paperwork. The tests would take a few days, they said. Felt like a lifetime. When I got home, Jessica was sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and swollen. Mark, I don't want to hear it, I said, my voice like steel. We'll talk when the results come in. Until then, I suggest you think long and hard about how you're going to explain this to the kids. Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. She'd already said enough. The days leading up to the test results were pure agony. I avoided Jessica as much as possible, which wasn't hard since she spent most of her time shut in the bedroom. The kids were the only thing holding me together. Mason kept asking why Mom seemed so sad, and Lily tried to cheer her up by drawing pictures of all of us together as a happy family. Each time I saw one of those crayon masterpieces, my chest tightened. Jessica tried to talk to me once or twice, but I shut her down every time. Save it, I'd say, brushing past her. I couldn't bear to hear more lies or half-baked excuses. I needed facts, cold, hard facts. Finally, the clinic called. I stepped outside to take the call, my hands trembling as I held the phone. "Mr. Carter?" The voice on the other end said. "We have the results of the paternity tests for Mason and Lily." I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Go ahead," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mason is biologically your son," the technician said. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. "However," she continued, "the test indicates that Lily is not biologically related to you." My knees nearly buckled. The world spun, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Are you sure?" I managed to choke out. "We triple-checked the results," she said gently. "I'm so sorry." I thanked her mechanically and hung up, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, devastation. My little girl, my sweet, innocent Lily wasn't mine. By the time I walked back inside, I felt like I was moving through water. Jessica was in the kitchen, nervously fidgeting with a cup of coffee. She looked up when I entered, her face pale. "Well?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I set my phone down on the counter and stared at her, letting the silence stretch until she squirmed under my gaze. "Mason is mine," I finally said. "Lily isn't." Jessica's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Mark, I can explain." "No," I snapped, my voice cutting through her sobs. "You don't get to explain. You lied to me, Jessica. For 7 years, you let me believe Lily was my daughter. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? What it's going to do to her?" She tried to reach for me, but I pulled away. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she cried. "I was scared, Mark. I didn't know how to tell you." "Scared?" I laughed bitterly. "You weren't scared when you were sneaking around, were you? You weren't scared when you looked me in the eye every day for 7 years and pretended everything was fine." She collapsed into a chair, her head in her hands. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "I didn't even know for sure. I thought there was a chance she was yours." "That's your excuse," I shouted. "You thought there was a chance? So you just gambled with my life, with Lily's life, and hoped for the best." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. I was too far gone, too consumed by the betrayal. "What happens now, Jessica?" I asked coldly. "Do you even know who her father is? Or were there so many mistakes that you've lost track?" She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "It was one time," she said softly. "Just once. And it didn't mean anything." "Don't you dare say it didn't mean anything," I growled. "It meant everything. It meant my life was a lie. It meant my daughter, the little girl I've loved and raised, wasn't mine. How can you sit there and act like it doesn't matter?" Jessica broke down completely, but I felt no sympathy. She'd destroyed everything, and now she had to live with the fallout. "I'm done, Jessica," I said, my voice trembling with finality. "I'm done with your lies, your excuses, all of it. You can explain this to Lily when you're ready, but don't expect me to be there to pick up the pieces." Her sobs followed me as I walked out the door. Leaving her alone with the mess she'd made, I didn't go far after walking out. I drove to the nearest park, parking under a tree where the late afternoon sun filtered through the branches. I sat there, staring at nothing, replaying Jessica's words in my head. "It was one time. She's not yours. I didn't mean for this to happen." Lily's smile flashed in my mind. How she'd run to me every time I came home. The way she clung to my leg when she was scared. Her proud cries of "Daddy." Whenever she showed me a drawing or told me a story, "Daddy." The word felt like a cruel joke now. She wasn't mine, not biologically, But that didn't change the 7 years we'd spent together, the bond we'd built. And yet, the knowledge burned in my chest, a constant reminder that Jessica's betrayal wasn't just mine to bear. It was Lily's too. I didn't know how long I sat there before my phone buzzed. A message from Jessica. Please come home. We need to talk. The nerve of her. She was the one who'd turned my life into a soap opera, and now she wanted to talk? I considered ignoring her, but something inside me said I needed to face this head-on. When I got back to the house, Jessica was sitting in the living room, her face streaked with dried tears. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes pleading. "Mark," she started, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said, my voice cold. "You've said enough already." She hesitated, biting her lip. "What are we going to do?" "I don't know about you," I said, "but I'm going to make sure my kids are okay. That includes Lily. She's still my daughter, no matter what your stupidity has done. But you and me? We're done, Jessica. There's no coming back from this." Her face crumpled, but I pressed on. "You don't just lie to someone for 7 years and expect them to forgive you. You don't get to act like the victim in this." She tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back. "Mark, please. I'm sorry. I'll do anything to fix this. We can go to counseling, we can." "Counseling won't change the fact that you broke every promise you ever made to me," I said. "It won't change the fact that you've been lying to Lily her entire life. Do you have any idea how that's going to affect her when she finds out? Because she will find out, Jessica. She deserves to know the truth." Jessica sobbed harder, but I felt nothing. The well of sympathy I'd once had for her was bone dry. "And another thing," I said, my voice like steel. "You're going to tell me who Lily's biological father is. Not for me, for her. She has a right to know where she comes from." Jessica's sobs turned to hiccups, and she nodded slowly. "I know," she whispered. "I know I messed up, Mark. I'll tell you everything." I sat down, crossing my arms. "Start talking." She took a deep breath, her voice shaking. "His name is Ryan. We worked together at my old job. Remember when I switched firms after Lily was born? He was a consultant there. It was a one-time thing, I swear. I never saw him again after that." "Does he know?" I asked, my voice tight. She shook her head. "No. He doesn't even know Lily exists. I didn't want to ruin his life too." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, how considerate of you. You didn't want to ruin his life, but mine? Fair game, right?" Jessica buried her face in her hands, unable to respond. "You're going to contact him," I said firmly. "You're going to tell him the truth, and you're going to deal with whatever fallout comes from that. Because I'm not carrying this burden alone." She nodded again, her shoulders shaking. "Okay," she whispered. I stood, my chest heavy with anger and exhaustion. "I'll sleep in the guest room for now. We'll figure out the logistics later. But this marriage is over, Jessica. You killed it." As I walked away, her sobs followed me down the hallway. The house was suffocating. Jessica's quiet sobs echoed down the hall that night, but I didn't care. I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. I'd gone to bed angry, but now, in the stillness of the night, a new emotion crept in: grief. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the death of trust, of the life I thought I had. And the worst part? The people I cared about the most, Mason and Lily, were caught in the crossfire. The next morning, I got up early, determined to put the pieces of my life back together. I had no idea what that would look like, but I knew one thing. My kids would always come first. When Jessica came into the kitchen, her face was pale, her eyes puffy from crying all night. She sat at the table, wringing her hands. For the first time in days, she looked genuinely remorseful, like she understood the gravity of what she'd done. "I told Ryan," she said softly, breaking the silence. I set my coffee down, the words hitting me like a brick. "And," her voice cracked, "he didn't take it well. He's married, has kids of his own. He said he doesn't want anything to do with Lily. Of course he didn't. What a stand-up guy," I said bitterly. "So what's your plan, Jessica? What are you going to tell Lily when she starts asking questions?" She flinched, her hands shaking. "I don't know. I don't know what to do, Mark." "Figure it out," I said coldly. Because this isn't going away. She deserves the truth, even if it's ugly. Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Mark, for everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her. You can't fix this, Jessica. Some things can't be undone. Her tears fell harder, but I didn't comfort her. Instead, I got up and walked to the living room, where Mason and Lily were watching cartoons. They looked up as I entered, their innocent faces a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around them. Hey, Dad, Mason said, grinning. Lily ran to me, throwing her arms around my legs. Daddy, can we go to the park today? She asked, her eyes wide with excitement. I knelt down, pulling her into a hug. Of course, sweetheart, I said, my voice thick with emotion. She smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. In that moment, I made my decision. Whatever happened between Jessica and me, whatever the DNA test said, Lily was my daughter. She might not have my blood, but she had my heart. And I wasn't about to let her suffer for Jessica's mistakes. Later that day, I sat Jessica down. Here's how this is going to work, I said firmly. We're getting a divorce. That's non-negotiable. But for the kids' sake, I'll keep things civil. Mason and Lily don't need to grow up in a war zone. Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't respond. I wasn't doing it for her. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of lawyers, paperwork, and tough conversations. Telling the kids was the hardest part. Mason cried, asking if it was his fault, and Lily clung to me, terrified I was leaving. I held them both, promising them that I wasn't going anywhere. Through it all, I stayed focused on them. They were my anchor, my reason for moving forward. Jessica tried to apologize again and again, but I kept her at arm's length. There was no going back. In the end, the divorce was finalized without too much drama. We agreed to shared custody, and I made it clear that Lily would never know the truth unless she asked. For now, she was my daughter in every way that mattered. And Jessica? She faded into the background of my life, a painful reminder of the lessons I'd learned the hard way. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone in my position, it's this. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. And when betrayal hits, don't let it break you. Stand up, face it, and fight for the people who matter. As for me, I'm moving forward one day at a time. And no matter what, I'll always be there for Mason and Lily. They're my world, my reason to keep going. Jessica may have broken my trust, but she didn't break me.